I'm Scott Miller, and it's a rainy day here in Leon, Nicaragua, so I am recording from the office. I've also been super productive today and just kind of focused on work. So today I'm not taking time to be outside. Just sometimes it needs to be done, but doing a little bit different light. So I think it works out just great today. I want to talk about how life in Nicaragua actually reflects a lot of growing up in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and probably a lot before that in the United States. I think that there's a lot of perspective that people can gain as to what it's actually like in Nicaragua through this context. There's like an entire way of looking at Nicaragua that I think we don't normally talk about, or no one really grasp that that's what we're seeing, but I think it's an interesting point. So we're going to talk about that right after the ball. Before we dig into today's topic, I do want to remind you guys how much I love it when you send in video questions and video comments so that I can put you guys on the show. When I mention this up front, often someone sends one in. When I save it for the end, everybody always kind of gives up. So get in those show notes and see how you can grab your phone or grab a GoPro, whatever you have, film yourself, do a selfie thing, put it on, lean it on a ledge somewhere, put it on a tripod, get someone to hold it for you, whatever. It doesn't have to be long. It could be a minute, 2 minutes. 5-10 minutes if you've got something really to say. That would be fantastic. It's so great when you guys do that because we can connect. Of course, if you have a question or something, but you don't want to send in a video of yourself, get in the show notes for the information on how to send it in, and get in the comments to just ask directly on the show. Engage one way or another, but I do love it when you guys send it. And of course, anything you need, like how to contact me or anything, get in those show notes. Lots of details in there, including how to sponsor the show and how to sponsor a few ladies here in Nicaragua who have health issues, and we are doing GoFundMe for them. Lots of information all down there. So living in Nicaragua today, something struck me recently that so much of what life is like here is actually very much akin to how life was like in the United States back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s. In the 80s, it began to change, probably when people started getting computers and gadgets and stuff quite a bit, and everybody started putting TVs in every room, things like that. There were some noticeable changes when I was still kind of young, but when I was very little, one of the things that was very standard is, one, houses weren't that fancy. They started to be. And I was talking to my daughter, Liesel, about this just recently. We were watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, and when we watch older shows, or even newer ones, we try to have some discussions and go back and talk about whether it's the actors or the production of the show, or its ramifications on society, or how what she's seeing reflects history in one way or another, and kind of gives her a chance to explore history and culture through time by watching older shows. It also gives me a chance to kind of contextualize what I'm saying, because so often shows that seemed so old when I was young, now when I'm watching them, I realize they were a lot closer to my childhood than I might suspect. And so like the distance between the Dick Van Dyke Show and my childhood was only 15 years. The amount of time from my childhood until now is pretty significant. So from a perspective of Dick Van Dyke, I pretty much watched the show when it was new. But to this perspective of me, it was a very old show already. But when I was very little, we were still in the black and white era for a lot of things. Not everything for sure, but many things. Our first TV, when my first TV was black and white, for example. So, watching the show, we were talking about what life was like in America and how certain things started to change, how houses got bigger, and how with bigger houses, those houses started to become expressive. We started to see the actual like architecture of the house, the design of the house itself started to become a really important thing to homeowners. When we went back to older houses, and of course, if you were wealthy or exceptional, this may have always applied. But for the average American, if you're going back to the 1910s, the 1920s, 1930s, and even 1940s, and to quite some degree the 1950s, houses were essentially utilitarian. They were basically boxes, rooms were small, everything was very plain and just enough to get by. And I grew up in a farmhouse built around 1910, and that's certainly what it was like. Now, ours was altered and expanded over time. So when I was growing up in the 1970s, some of this was hidden, but much of it was still exposed. In the late 1950s and especially into the 1960s, we started to, for normal everyday Americans, we started to build houses that were themselves like design pieces. They were interesting and exciting all by themselves. If you watch shows like The Dick Van Dyke Show, or even more so The Brady Bunch that came not too many years later, you start to notice that the house itself was kind of a character on the show. It had a lot of presence. And you really started to notice it. If you're watching older shows or looking at older movies or just thinking about houses that are designed before a certain era, you don't really think of the house very much other than not being impressed by it. It's just so plain. But when you start thinking about the Dick Van Dyke Show or you think about the Brady Bunch, you think about their house very prominently. And that is because the house had all this design going on. And with that, we started to do interior design inside the house. And carrying on from that, and certainly not purely connected to it, but in the same more or less era, just a few years later, we probably went from house design to interior design to filling the house with things, becoming a very strong consumer culture slowly over the decades. So if you watch from the 60s to 70s to 80s, this progression pretty much happens. And by the late 80s, we had a pretty strong possession culture where we're often putting in shelving units just to fill them with things. And you start to notice that houses started to become full. Now, it's true, many older houses were full of junk, but that's a little bit different. We used to accumulate things and no one wanted to get rid of them because you never know if you could fix it or whatever. We didn't have a lot of money in much of the 20th century, especially like the 1930s, where people who went through the Great Depression would start to hoard things naturally because, well, you just never know and you're not going to get enough money for it to justify getting rid of it. You can't afford to just throw it out because you just never know, right? So we all accumulated old nuts and bolts and wires. It was very basic stuff and it was very junky kind of stuff in many cases. But starting especially around the late 1980s and going into the 1990s, we started to be in a position where we were able to start to accumulate lots and lots of things. And now economists will generally today, having time to go back and look at it, they're notating that there was a switch that started to happen, and it took a while. But eventually what happened was luxury items, the things that we enjoy owning and having, like cameras and so forth, all these expensive little items that we collect and put around our houses, those things used to be very expensive. Not that long ago, when I was a child, many of those things were outrageously expensive. So owning a camera was something that most people did not do, or not a good camera anyway. To own a TV was a big deal. To own two was really big. Things like that. And we didn't accumulate movies. When I was a kid, no one bought movies and kept them in their house. You watch TV and you watch what they gave you, right? The idea that you were going to go out and purchase movies, that you were going to purchase a DVR, that then you were going to purchase a Laserdisc player, that you were going to have collections of things, you were going to own the music you listen to, and so forth, were actually relatively recent concepts. Somebody owned something in the past, but the amount that they owned was very small. Things that I did in my childhood, including having a collection of thousands of DVDs, plus quite a bit of vinyl, plus some cassettes. And by the mid-1990s, I had a massive collection of movies on Laserdisc, for example. These were massive collections, like truly big collections. And those are things that just a few years before were unrealistic. So we noticed these things change, but we didn't really put our finger on it until relatively recently, where we noticed that in the United States, housing and food and necessities have become quite expensive, but luxuries have become very cheap. And because of that, we have, and slowly over time, started accumulating luxuries more and more. We have kitchen gadgets for every little thing. We have so many electronic devices. We're constantly updating. We have to get the latest and greatest. We fill our shelves with things. People own books just for the sake of decorating with ownership, right? We actually use collecting stuff as a means of decorating, and we always kind of did that. My great-grandmother used to collect salt and pepper shakers and display them on the walls. But, when I look back at 80 years ago, people were collecting salt and pepper shakers or kitchen magnets, really tiny things that cost in today's money $2 or $3, maybe $10 at a stretch. That's the kind of stuff they were collecting. But by the time that I started collecting things, my collectibles include antique computers and brand new cameras, right? So my idea of collecting is very different and much more expensive, much more extensive than hers was, than anyone I knew in those old days. Those things have changed. And here in Nicaragua, what I think we see is two things. One, from an economic standpoint, we still see that luxury items remain relatively expensive, at least when compared to income levels. So the average person isn't going to go out and buy 2 or 3 televisions, but they will have one, but they'll save up for it. And it's a big purchase. Even though the price is not that high, they're still able to get lower U.S. prices, but income levels are lower. But the cost of food and especially housing are dramatically lower, and public transportation is practically free. So those things remain achievable, obtainable, when looking at least middle class Nicaraguan income rates. So someone who is earning $800 a month can absolutely go out and save up and buy a house and often get a car and still go out to eat and still accumulate a small number of things. So the approach that people have for things is very different, that they still, like the United States in the 50s and 60s, are easily able to live, or relatively easily able to live. But to accumulate luxury items is far more difficult, not as difficult as it was in the 1930s in the US, because they can order off of Amazon in the US and get those prices here. It's only relative to their wages that it becomes a little bit difficult, rather than in comparison to other luxury items like in the United States. So it's a very interesting way to look at it, that they never went through this flip the way that the United States did. And so the idea and the culture around accumulating items didn't become a thing here. Now, of course, there's some people who want to accumulate things. That's always going to happen, right? There's always someone, and they see American culture, so they're aware that other places do it. But when you go into homes, when you talk to people, when you just live life here in Nicaragua, one of the things that I notice very strongly is that people have no culture of going out shopping for things. There is no, retail therapy. That's not something that exists. Now, of course, people are going to say, well, yes, because it's a very low income country, so they can't do that. Absolutely. That plays a role. But that is not the only factor. Many things are obtainable, and people who do have higher incomes still don't tend to fall into that trap or go down that path, because culturally it is not a thing you do. You don't use purchasing things as a way to show off. It is not something you do for entertainment. It is not an expectation that you will go into someone's house and that the walls will be filled and that there'll be shelves full of things and there'll be closets full of stuff. Clothing, sure. Necessary items, of course. Toiletries and linens, absolutely. But am I going to go in and find someone's hobby room that is full of things that they've been buying just because they want to collect a bunch of things, or they want to own a bunch of different things, or they have shelves and they want to fill them? And like so many Americans and so many people around the world, may be buying books just to make, not because they're reading them, not because they need them for some reason, but because they want to own and maintain a lot of things, because we've been taught that that looks nice, that it is a form of decoration, that it is a form of affluence, that it looks good. But when you step back and look at it from a Nicaraguan perspective, it doesn't particularly look good. It looks odd. Why would you want to take the time to fill your house with all these things that you may not be using? If you need to move, you have to move all those things. If you are looking for something you need, all that stuff is in the way. If it's something you're going to use, absolutely, that's different. But if you're collecting things just to collect them, that doesn't make sense to a lot of Nicaraguans. It certainly doesn't make sense in the culture. When you look around people's houses, houses are mostly bare. People don't have things that they don't need. They pare things down naturally. We talk about when you become an expat, you probably want to get rid of a lot of the stuff that you have and make your life is simpler, because it's easier to move. You're more footloose and fancy free. You can sell some things and make some money, have that garage sale and, get an extra $1,000 for your move or whatever. Lots of reasons that it makes sense. But the biggest, of course, is you don't want possessions weighing you down. But every so often, we have someone who posts, well, for me, the thing that's super important is I want shelves full of DVDs, right? That was an interesting one. I've had two people say that. And one of the things I always say is one of the reasons I got away from DVDs, that I'm so passionate about digital media, is, of course, because I move, I don't want to ship a bunch of DVDs around. But I got away from that problem by taking every DVD out of its cases and putting into really tight sleeves so that I have this really dense book of all my DVDs, so I can carry what would be shelves and shelves of DVDs in a single big book that has a handle, and I can just carry that around. So I've mostly solved that problem. Getting them here to Nicaragua isn't a big challenge. But if I was to bring them down, I'm certainly going to just shove them in a shelf in the back of a bodega, because keeping DVDs on display isn't attractive. It isn't something that looks like good home decor. And when I go into a house, and to some degree this is personal, but if I go into a house, even in the United States, and see shelves of DVDs, it feels very tacky at best, right? It's not decorative, it's not pretty, and it doesn't look classy. So those aren't things that I would desire to have even if I lived in the US. I would want to hide that, and I did when living in the US. I did not want it on display. I think that CDs looked a little bit better. They were much smaller. DVDs specifically were the least attractive of all media over the years. Blu-rays were a little bit better. Laserdiscs kind of looked like vinyl. Vinyl was kind of interesting because you had the big cover, but they were so narrow you could put a bunch on a shelf and you kind of didn't notice. But even that didn't look very good. Books really looked the best, in my opinion, sitting on shelves, followed by CDs. Anything other than that, I think, is really ugly. But even CDs, they're so, non-uniform. I think books are probably ugly, but we're so accustomed to them that we have a hard time recognizing what they really look like. And we feel like it's got like this library thing, so we kind of give it a pass. But I suspect if you were to come from a context where you weren't taught that that was a good thing, that we may have a different opinion of it, but we all come from that context, so it gets a pass. Books do look kind of cool, and unlike all the other media, they kind of smell nice too. So we get that. But being in the tropics, books get ruined. So you see a bunch of books on a shelf, you assume they're probably in bad shape and probably full of bugs. You don't really want that either for different reasons. So we have this very different approach. So living here in Nicaragua, we're used to bare rooms. And one of the things that I like is that we're able to get everything digital and have access to just as much, or far more in many cases, things. But we don't have to fill our house. We don't have to move them from place to place. They don't have to become a hazard for fires, and they don't have to be a temptation for thieves. That works out really well. But what's really interesting is simply that you can look at Nicaraguan culture as being like the United States in the early 80s or maybe in the 1970s or 60s, and seeing it from things have a relative price and availability that's similar to how things were back then, and there isn't this culture that has arisen from luxury and possessive items being so cheap and affordable and so easily accessible. If you go shopping at the mall, there aren't a million different versions of the same basic thing. There aren't places that sell DVDs. I've never seen a DVD sold here. I've never seen a DVD player. I've never seen a Blu-ray. I've never seen a Blu-ray player. I've never seen a CD. I've never seen a CD player. So when you start thinking of it in that context, there's no stores selling those things. Now those, that's one type of thing. There's not very many of any type of random object being sold, only utility things. So unless you actually have something that you would say, oh, I need that for some purpose, it's going to be a struggle to find it. But if you go to the mall in the United States, there's going to be lots and lots and lots of nearly similar versions of many similar things, so that you have lots of choice. You can spend time shopping. You can buy competing objects to see how they work. It's just, you have a lot of selection and a lot of places to go, so it can become something you do. Here, you really generally don't. That doesn't mean that those things don't exist. They're few and far between. You're not being bombarded with it. There isn't a big profit to be made by running a store on every corner selling lots and lots of stuff. So simple things like in the United States, Main Street USA, now this is probably fading away a bit, but 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was really popular for Main Street USA to start to be full of shops that sold knickknacks and antiques and home decor and esoteric clothing and all kinds of weird little things on these places. And it worked because people shopped as entertainment. People would take the weekend to go antiquing. People go to flea markets. All those things, that's not how you go shopping when there's something you need under normal circumstances. That's how you go shopping when you have no idea what you want. You just need to shop. You've got, as we say, money burning a hole in your pocket, and you want to go use that excess funds as a form of entertainment. And maybe it's not a lot of excess funds, but luxury items, unnecessary items, were generally quite cheap in the United States as compared to our salaries. So we would do that culturally. Just go out, spend the day, and buy some things. What'd you buy today? Could be anything. It could be furniture. It could be, knickknacks. It could be a part to an old car that would look cool on a shelf. Who knows? And it might be an old computer that actually works. The sky is the limit. Everything is being sold in the United States. It's like the song from Portobello Road from Bedknobs and Broomsticks, right? He sings the song about how there's anything that a chap can unload is sold on the barrow on the Portobello Road. And that is really true about Main Street America and malls and just everywhere you go. There's always something to buy, and it's often with unbelievable variety. And here in Nicaragua, you just don't get that. Even being at the Gallerias, which is the biggest mall in the country, and being at Metro Central, the second biggest, wandering around, there's, clothing shops for sure. And a surprising percentage of the shopping experience is restaurants and cafes, because consumable items, of course, you're going to buy, and having some variety in a single building is popular. And clothing is something that, of course, everyone needs. And there's some basic stuff like five and dime stores. There's several competing in the mall, much like we would have Woolworths or a Five Below in the United States. We have Miniso and Mumuso and Del Todo, and others, right? In most malls, you're going to have between 2 and 5 of these low-cost items. And you can get pens and paper and chargers for your phone and things that you generally need all the time. And they have some pretty good deals. But to actually go shopping beyond those things, you're going to find that mostly it's pretty limited anywhere you go shopping. We just don't have that kind of variety because we don't need to buy stuff. And to really appreciate Nicaraguan culture, I think you will benefit from at least understanding that this is what you're going to come up against, that for people who really like going shopping, of course you can find a way to do it. But you're going to be in a place where other people are going to be like, wow, I don't know anyone who's ever done that. That's such a out-of-place thing. And so many people love being here and many parts of the world because we get away from that consumer culture. I certainly, from time to time, love being able to go on Amazon and buy things. But I do find that the longer I'm here, the less I find shopping for something of any interest. And I mostly try to figure out how I can make do with the things I already have. Not because I must save that money, but of course that's a nice benefit, but mostly simply because I don't find shopping an enjoyable way to pass my time. There are easier things to do, more fun things to do, more fulfilling things to do, especially cheaper things to do. And so I think my experience is that nearly all expats come from a place where buying things is a form of entertainment and end up slowly, without really thinking about what's happening, losing that as a form of entertainment and starting to adjust to Nicaraguan culture. And they don't realize that when they're going to people's houses, that's why it looks the way that it does. And why, when they want to decorate, it's like, why is there no stuff to decorate? Why is my house feel so empty? My house here feels incredibly empty, but Nicaraguans are like, what? And it seems normal. And we're like, but it's empty. Like, here's a room with nothing in it. Here's a room with just a couch and a TV, this huge space. There's nothing, a water cooler, right? All this empty space. And Nicaraguans are like, that's functional. It does exactly what you need and doesn't do anything else. I'm like, well, yeah, it's not failing in its purpose, but we feel like it needs something, right? And you go into another room and we're like, this room, it has nothing. There's no decorations. It needs something. But then Nicaraguans are like, it's how you use it. It works fine. And so that perspective, this being more utilitarian, is a refreshing look on the world. And it's not going to be for everyone. For some of you, it's going to be, whoa, I know I like decorating and I really like being able to do that. And you'll need to put in a little bit more effort to go find the right shops and find the right places and maybe have things shipped in to be able to fulfill that desire for the activity of shopping or the activity or the result of having a large variety of things that really reflect your personality, for example. But for many others, I think you may find that there is a relief from the need to do those things and an acceptance that you can simply not buy a bunch of things. You don't need to own a bunch of things, and absolutely nobody thinks that's weird or odd or wonders what's wrong. And for me, that's been a really wonderful change. So I hope that this gives you a little look into Nicaraguan society and what you can expect living here over time. Watch for it. I bet you'll find that this is a very common thing. Of course, people do decorate, but especially decorations have a tendency to be very low cost, very standard, and generally quite religious in nature. If you get to someone's house that is not particularly religious, you'll generally find almost no decorations. Just the amount I have here in my office is extensive for a Nicaraguan. That I have what are essentially tapestries on the wall is unheard of. That I have a restaurant-style wooden wall behind me. Things that people come in and like, wow, this is really cool. Nicaraguans don't do that stuff. And so it often is seen. And window treatments. Just having, decorated blinds and things like that really tend to be like, ooh, this is a fancy thing. Like, no, we don't do that. It's just whatever's handy, right? So ways to look at culture in Nicaragua. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAllenMiller. And as always, if you watch another video, share this on social media or tell someone about the show. It'll help support us. And I will see all of you tomorrow.